Hey everybody, welcome back to Bourbon Battles. My name's Joe. Hey, we've got a really interesting episode for you today. You might have seen it in the headlines wherever you found this, but today we're going to talk about the Stave and Thief Society and their different levels of education. How much does it cost? What do you get for it? Is it worth it? Hey, stick with us and you'll find all that out. Okay, so as we said, we're going to talk about the Stave and Thief Society. You can see it right here on my shirt. What is the Stave and Thief Society? It's an organization that was created down in Kentucky. They're based out of Louisville to educate the consumers, us, right, on the history of bourbon and different things. And we'll go through what you learn here in just a second. They also exist to really educate the extreme bourbon enthusiast, somebody like myself, or somebody in hospitality, a bartender, a server, a restaurant owner. They do all these things. So because of that, they have different levels of certification. So you can attend their classes online or in person on one of them. So the first class we want to talk about is a Certified Bourbon Steward Course, which is $75. And that's one that I think most of you would be the most interested in. It's an online course. You could go through it. Very, very cool. And we'll get to the meat and potatoes of all this stuff. And they also have what they call the Executive Bourbon Steward class. You could do this one at their facility or online. I just completed this course online. So the cost of that is $495 online and $595 in person. Okay, so what do you get? We're going to concentrate on the $495 online Executive Bourbon Steward course, which is what I took so I could speak to that the most. Before we do, I'm going to have to get a little pour of something so we can talk through this and enjoy it. So give me a little of this Yellowstone store pick that I have not tried yet. If you've never had these Yellowstone store picks, you probably ought to try them. Very good. So the Executive Bourbon Steward course, like I said, I did mine online. As we get into that, I want to first show you the video that Stave and Thief has out there. You can find this on YouTube. I'm going to replay it right here so you can kind of get the gist of what's going on. Then we'll go into greater detail.
Come spend a day at Moonshine University and become an Executive Bourbon Steward. Stave and Thief Society was developed by professional educators and experts from the distilling, bourbon, and hospitality industries to provide a premium education for bourbon enthusiasts everywhere. In fact, it's the only official bourbon education course endorsed by the Kentucky Distillers Association and the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Members' perks include a membership pin, a sensory training kit, and a challenge coin. Or join as a business and get all of that, plus the skills and materials to train your entire staff as bourbon aficionados. Stave and Thief Society Bourbon Certification Program. This is where you can go from bourbon enthusiast to bourbon expert.
So that's pretty cool, right? So now I want to go through my experience of it. So first of all, what you get with the course, right? You can buy these cool t-shirts, right? And hats, Glencairns. But what you're going to receive in the mail for the Executive Bourbon Steward course, and go online, you can see what you get with the Certified Bourbon Steward course and all that stuff. So you get a book. This is a nice hardbound book that I've actually gone back to a few times and looked at some different things since I've completed the course. You also get this sensory kit. We'll talk more about this, but this is what starts to train you, right? So as I'm drinking this Yellowstone, if I'm trying to figure out what tasting note I'm getting there, I'm like, am I getting some brown spices? I might go to this legend right here, find brown spice, which is number 27, pull the vial out, right, where I can actually nose it. I don't think that's what I'm getting. So you can really start to go down through these things and pick out those tasting notes. You know how we are with tasting notes. And we don't hate tasting notes. We don't think they're non-existent at Bourbon Battles, right? What we think is everybody tastes something different. Where you might get brown spice, I might get tobacco or leather, right? And it's what we associate with those things and what we call them. And this is going to help you determine that. Now, if you don't want to take the course and you just want to purchase this, this is available for purchase all by itself. So what's neat about this to me is, and I may be getting a little ahead of myself, right? So the first 17 things in here are production aromas, right? Things that are done to the whiskey process, which we'll talk a little bit about this as we go through what this course is all about. But like, let's say acetic acid, right? There's some of that in the distilling process. And some of those notes may translate over to the whiskey. So, half of this is from basically the distilling process, and half of this is common aromas you get afterwards, right? Things that come from the barrel and the aging, right? Like nuts and vanilla and caramel and orange and all those things you've heard about traditionally with vanilla, right? Or traditionally with bourbon. So very, very cool. Like I say, you know how I feel about tasting notes, but they are real. They're fun to talk about with your friends. And this is an amazing, amazing tool. Even if you don't take the class, I would probably, if you're serious into bourbon and you have a collection, some walls that look something like this is probably worth having around, right? So as I look through this, right, the Certified Bourbon Steward Course, $75. That's the price of a good bottle of whiskey, a decent bottle of whiskey, right? So that's worth it. Hands down, no questions asked. This doesn't come with it. This is $250 by itself, I believe. So price of 2 bottles of whiskey, right? And the online course, $495. That's what you're going to spend on 4 or 5 good bottles of whiskey. If you have a couple hundred, that's not a big deal. If you're more of a normal bourbon drinker and you have 4 or 5, maybe you want to go with a $75 course. Highly recommend it. So let's talk about some of the things you're going to learn as I sip on this a little bit. This is so good, by the way. So good. Hopefully you're watching this, Stephen Fonte. I'll send you a copy of it. So you're going to learn things like, what is the classifications of whiskey? What are the rules of bourbon? A lot of you think you already know a lot of this stuff. And I'll tell you, this course, I thought I knew more than I knew, right? I learned that there's a lot going on that I did not know, right? So that's really important to know. You're going to learn some things that you already knew, but you're going to learn a lot you different. So what are the rules of bourbon? What's Kentucky bourbon, straight bourbon, all those things you hear. What are the rules for Irish whiskey, Scotch whiskey, Japanese whiskey, Tennessee whiskey, Canadian whiskey, wheat whiskey, malt whiskey, and moonshine? What rules apply to all those things, right? Because you already know, right? Bourbon has to be 51% corn and aged in a new American white oak container, not then say barrel container, right? You know a lot of these rules, right? And that kind of stuff. What's the difference between whiskey with an E and whiskey with no E, right? You're going to learn some of that stuff right out of the gate going through this course. And you're going to follow along in your book as well as an amazing set of videos. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you think this is something you're going to do in a quick afternoon, that's not right. I don't know how many hours I have in this, but it's upwards of 20. This is not, and I took my time. I think you could probably do it in a good solid 8 hours if you really wanted to. But this isn't something that you just haphazardly do and click through. You're going to have to take a test at the end. And it's not as easy as you might think, although I did pass it on the first try, so I'm pretty happy about that. You're going to take quizzes all along the line, so I highly recommend you take notes in your book as you go through the video if you're going to get serious about it. You don't have to get as serious as I did, and you can still pass it. So then we're going to talk about, you're going to learn about things like the anatomy of a label, right? What do all these words all over these labels mean, right? What is bottled and bond? What is sour mash? What is sweet mash? What is finishing? The finishing barrel, what's a flavored bourbon or whiskey, what's non-distiller produced, right? We hear it all the time, MGP. There's a lot more than just MGP out there. What's a single barrel? What's barrel strength? What's a small batch? You're going to learn all that very early on in this course. You're going to jump right into the science of bourbon. What's a mash bill? You're going to learn about milling the grains, cooking, fermenting. You're going to learn about congeners. I probably mispronounced that, but that comes back into your sensory kit, right? As you learn that, you're going to get into this kind of stuff. Enzymes, the starches, the yeast, and how all of that affects flavor. Then you're going to move on to the distilling process, the barreling, aging, and ultimately bottling it into the bottle itself, right? Ready for you to pick up. Sorry, I might have to take breaks to sip on that because it's so good. You're going to talk about the craft of aging and mingling. How does whiskey get its color? How age affects the spirit? How warehousing affects it? The kind of warehouse, how tall it is, the climate that it's in, what the warehouse is made out of. Is it concrete? Is it wood? Is it on the 10th floor? Is it on the first floor? All these things matter, right? You're going to learn about the different parts of a barrel and how they're assembled and what all that means. How distillers mingle whiskey to maintain a consistent product, right? This is a batch product. It's one of my favorite batch products there is. Evan Williams, right? Bottled and bond. There's a ton of barrels that all come together to make this product, and they have to make that consistent. So this bottle tastes like that bottle that I have up there, the same stuff, right? They want that. They want that consistency, right? Maker's Mark is known for their consistency because of the way they rotate barrels and do different things, right? You're going to learn about how oxygen affects this whiskey, char levels, how long do they cook the barrel for to give it so much char. You're going to learn things like angel share, entry proof. Does it matter what the proof is when it goes in the barrel? It absolutely does. You're going to learn about that. You're going to learn about toasting barrels, right? This big phenomenon. Do you like Old Forester 1910 or Elijah Craig toasted or Monk's Road toasted? Do you like these things? You're going to learn about that process. And you're going to learn, most importantly, how these things affect flavor. So as you start to learn what affects flavor, what you like, you get into your kits here, you start to pick out things. Now you can really start this bourbon journey to figure out what you like and really hone in on those things. You're going to like a lot more than you think. And one of my favorite parts was you're going to learn the history of the national spirit. You're going to learn about whiskey on the frontier, the early days of America. You're going to learn about America's first excise tax. Yeah, you got it right. It was on whiskey. You're going to learn about the Whiskey Rebellion, the early evolution of bourbon and whiskey, the birth of bourbon itself, right? I always tell the story about floating whiskey down the Mississippi River and ends up in New Orleans and you get the racehorses back. You're going to learn a little more details than that, right? You're going to learn about the Bottled and Bond Act and how important that was in the growth of bourbon and whiskey. You're going to learn about Prohibition and how that affected bourbon. And some people still made bourbon for medicinal purposes after Prohibition. You're going to learn about how World War II affected bourbon. It was a lot bigger deal than you might think. And you're going to learn about the modern era of bourbon and what's going on today, right? If you look around, like everything on this shelf back here is basically a unique bottle. I don't know that there's any duplicates back there. And what you see back there is repeated over there and repeated over there and some down there, right? So all these are different, right? So this modern era bourbon, this bourbon boom, if you would, and what that means, you're going to learn about that. You're going to learn about why is Kentucky the birthplace of bourbon, how bourbon got its name. Did it come from Bourbon County? You're going to have to sign up to find out. Is the water perfect in Kentucky? Did that have anything to do with it? Are the grains perfect? Is the soil perfect for growing the corn? Is the oak there? Is the yeast there? How all this affects. And one of my biggest thoughts is the seasons, right? That's what you're going to take away from this. Indiana and Kentucky, right? They make a ton of bourbon and the seasons make it, right? The extreme cold and the extreme hot. You're going to learn about all that and why it actually affects the flavor of the bourbon. Why do bourbons taste different? Why does this bourbon taste different than this bourbon? You know, they're made at different distilleries, but they're right down the road from each other, basically. So the grain selection matters. The yeast strain matters, right? The fermentation techniques matter. The barrels they use, the entry proof, the warehousing environment, like we mentioned. And then one of the coolest things you're going to learn here is how to build a flight, right? I love to have people over and do whiskey tastings, right? So you build a flight for them. You're going to learn how to do that. You're going to learn about different glassware, right? My favorite, the Glencairn, right? You're going to learn about different things to do. You're going to learn how to different themes, right? It could be barrel proof stuff. It could be by manufacturer. It could be weeded stuff. It could be common stuff. You're going to learn a little bit about that and learn how to start to build a really proper flight. You're going to learn how to nose the whiskey. You're going to learn how to look at it and evaluate the whiskey by the appearance and, of course, the taste. You're going to learn how to use water. You'll see Chad and I put a drop of water in our bourbon a lot to start to evaluate taste. There's a reason for that. You're going to start to learn sensory components, right? You're going to get back into this sensory kit again and learn how to use this to understand the spirit that you love. And I'm guessing you love it or you wouldn't be watching me and you wouldn't be considering signing up. So you're going to learn about hospitality in the bourbon culture, right? And what is the bourbon steward's role? I'm a bourbon steward now. I'm living out part of my role by doing this, right? I love to talk to people about bourbon. And lastly, you're going to learn about the different distillers of bourbon, right? There's a comprehensive list in here, and I believe as new distilleries pop up that make bourbon, or whiskey, I believe you get an email that updates your list. So very, very cool. I loved it. $500 is a lot of money, but if you look around, is it really? I learned a lot. You do take a final at the end, and once you pass, right, you get a lapel pin and a challenge coin. You don't get a certificate, but you get that challenge coin, which is really cool. And you get to wear. You can order. You got to order a shirt or a hat, right? So you can wear that around Kentucky, and people know you. And if I see, I'll be like, "Hey, I took that class too." So that's a lot of fun. So highly, highly recommend you checking these guys out. StaveandThief.com. It's down here. You see it. Amazing program. They're doing really cool things. I'm so very happy and thankful that we worked out a deal with Stave and Thief so that I got to go through this. Chad's working his way through it right now. You heard him talk about it from time to time. And you may even see us, mention Stave and Thief from time to time in our videos, including, messing with this sensory kit a little bit. So check it out. I think that anybody that's into bourbon and considers himself a bourbon enthusiast, hobbyist, bourbon lover, you got to at least consider that $75 course, guys. That's everybody watching this video has a bottle of whiskey that costs $75 would be my guess. Could be wrong, but that's what it is. And if you're really into it, I would say that the $495 course is worth it. If you want to take a trip to Louisville, the extra $100 for in person is probably well worth the spend. So, hey, one thing that we do need to talk about is enjoy this spirit, get to love it, get to learn about it. Whatever you do, don't drink and drive. Just enjoy it with your friends, enjoy it responsibly. And you know us, we like to enjoy it blind, figure this stuff out. Hey, until next time, I'm Joe and we're Bourbon Battles. Check out Stave and Thief.
If you drink, don't drive, do the watermelon crawl.